I've always been drawn to places steeped in sorrow, places where the past murmurs from peeling walls and forgotten corridors. There's just something about them that just calls to me. So when I first heard the legend of the house on Wraith Hill, I felt an irresistible pull. They said it was a grand manor long abandoned, swallowed by the dark embrace of an ancient forest. Rumours whispered that tragedy befell its previous occupants, a family destroyed by betrayal, grief, and something unnatural. I couldn't ignore the allure. I knew, with every fibre of my being, I had to see it for myself. The only problem? None of the stories or rumours could agree exactly where Wraith Hill was. No one knew how to find it. I remember the day that all changed clearly. A monotonous rain-soaked Thursday, I received a dusty envelope by post. Inside, a single yellowed letter beckoned me to unravel the mystery of Wraith Hill. The handwriting was elegant yet trembling, as though written by someone who had seen things that no one should see. The letter mentioned strange lights, ghostly cries in the night, and a secret that tied the house to its former occupants' murky origins. There was no name on the letter, no explanation as to why I'd been chosen. It should have stoked my suspicions. Perhaps a more sensible person would have ignored the letter and gone about their mundane lives. But not me. To me, it just added to the mystery. My heart pounded with an uneasy excitement as I committed myself to this investigation. As night crept in on a cold autumn evening, I set out, following the directions in the letter. The drive was long, the rural roads flanked by skeletal trees draped in mist. Approaching Wraith Hill, I felt the temperature drop, a reminder that this was no ordinary abandoned building. Through a gap in the gnarled branches, I caught a glimpse of the manor, a looming silhouette atop a barren hill, its once regal facade now marred by time and neglect. I parked under an ancient oak, its limbs crooked and blackened, and stepped out. The wind whispered secrets that only the dead could understand. With a deep breath, I recalled the words on the yellowed page, realizing that the first step into Wraith Hill was a step towards unearthing centuries of buried sorrow. I pushed open the heavy oak door, mildly surprised to find it unlocked, and entered. The foyer was vast, a cavern of darkness punctuated by shards of moonlight that spilled through broken stained glass windows. Dust motes danced in the light, as if celebrating the intrusion of life in a place that had long since surrendered to silence. The scent of decay permeated the air. Every footstep echoed ominously on the cold stone floor. I paused before a grand staircase that spiraled up into shadow. Its railings were choked with cobwebs, and I could almost hear the faint whispers climbing those steps. "Hello?" I called softly, more out of habit than hope of an answer. The only response was the whistling of the wind outside and my own pounding heartbeat. I pulled out my camera and a flashlight, tools in my quest to document every detail of this haunted relic. I wandered through the silent corridors. Along the wall hung portraits of stern-faced people, their eyes seeming to follow me, silently demanding I remember their names. A chill raced down my spine with each new discovery. A broken music box lying abandoned on a dusty table, a shattered mirror that reflected too many copies of myself, and piles of yellowed letters that hinted at a long-forgotten family dispute. In one particularly large room, I found a desk with a faded leather journal. The inscription on its cover read, "To those who dare to remember." I hesitated before opening it, as if fearing the spirits that might be guarding it. Then I sat on the cold, creaking floor and began to read. Diary entries were scattered over decades. They spoke of extravagant parties, whispered promises, sudden outbursts, and then a marked change. Fearful scribbles, frantic warnings, and unexplained gaps. One entry caught my eye. "The night is full of voices. I hear them in the walls, in the floor. I can no longer tell if it's the anguished cries of my children or the echoes of my own guilt. The house is alive with sorrow." My pulse quickened. This house wasn't just abandoned, it was scarred by heartache and perhaps something far more sinister. With the journal clutched in one hand and my flashlight trembling in the other, I ventured further into the winding halls. The whispering began almost immediately. At first it was so soft it could have been my imagination, a delicate hum that I dismissed as the wind. But soon the murmurs took on a cadence, almost like gentle pleading intermixed with cries of despair. I followed the sound to a narrow corridor where the wallpaper had peeled away in long, curling strips, revealing crumbling plaster beneath. Here, shadows gathered thickly, dark figures at the edges of my vision that vanished when I looked directly. I could feel their sorrow seeping into me, a weight that pulled at my heart. I reached a room that seemed untouched by time, a child's room, perhaps. The walls painted in faded pastel hues, a dollhouse sitting in the corner, and a bed covered in a white, moth-eaten quilt. As I stepped in, the temperature dropped further. I could see my breath clouding before my eyes. Then a soft giggle echoed, a sound both joyful and terribly mournful. I spun around, my light flickering wildly, but the giggle was gone. Instead, I caught the faintest glimpse of a small figure darting into the darkness of the corridor. "Hello?" My voice trembled as I addressed the unseen child. Silence answered me back. I sank to the floor and took a deep, shuddering breath. I wasn't sure whether to call out again or to retreat. Curiosity battled with instinct until I finally decided to press onward. There was a part of me that believed the house itself was trying to speak, to reveal its hidden tale. The next few hours were a haze of discovery and dread. I found secret passages behind false walls, remnants of locked rooms that I had to force open with the crowbar I'd brought. Each creak of wood and scrape of metal was punctuated by distant, unexplained sounds, like the sobbing of a woman or the whispered name of a lost soul. In one hidden alcove, I discovered more documents, photographs of a once happy family gathered in stately poses, a letter from a fiancé promising eternal love, and a final, hastily scribbled note that simply read, "We cannot escape the curse of Wraith Hill." Time wore on, and the line between waking nightmares and waking reality began to blur. I stopped to catch my breath in the grand parlour. Heavy velvet curtains hung in tatters over tall windows, and the remnants of an ornate chandelier lay shattered on the floor. As I looked up, I was struck by an overwhelming feeling of being watched, of a presence observing from behind the layers of despair embedded in every crumbling bit of plaster. Then I heard it clearly, a distinct knocking coming from behind a closed door at the far end of the hall. The pattern was deliberate, as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. When I opened the door, I found a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The sound of that knock now echoed from deep within the dark passageway. I hesitated, feeling both dread and undeniable compulsion to follow. "I must know," I whispered, almost in a trance, as I carried my journal and flashlight down the narrow steps. The staircase led to what appeared to be the nursery, though it was an odd place to put one. It was a small, circular room with a high domed ceiling, all lit by an eerie pale glow that seemed to emanate from nowhere. Antique toys were scattered across the floor, a rocking horse, a cracked music box, and several faded teddy bears whose glassy eyes reflected the feeble light in a haunting manner. The air here was suffocating. In the centre of the nursery I discovered a small table with a stained lace tablecloth. On it lay a faded family portrait. It depicted a family of four, a stern-looking father, a sorrowful mother, and two children, one of them clutching a small doll. At the back of the portrait, barely visible, was the signature, Margaret, 1897. I couldn't help but feel a chilling familiarity in those eyes. A small folded slip of paper sat tucked into the corner of the frame. I pulled it out and unfolded it with trembling fingers. The writing inside was faded but still legible. In a trembling voice, I read it out loud. "To the one who finds this, within these walls the past and present converge. Our souls linger, bound by sorrow and unanswered goodbyes. Only by confronting the truth may we find release." As if triggered by my utterance, a soft sobbing began, a sound so heart-wrenching it brought tears to my eyes. I turned slowly, and there, concealed in the corner of the room near an old wardrobe, I glimpsed a spectral figure, a little girl. She was in a tattered dress, eyes wide and brimming with unspeakable grief. For a few heartbeat-long moments, our eyes met. In her gaze I saw a desperate longing for help, and for an end to the torment that had trapped her in this eternal prison of memories. "Help me," she whispered, her voice layered with the echoes of the past. Before I could respond, she faded away into the shadow, leaving only the cold air in her wake. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, yet I felt bound to this tragic story. I spent what felt like an eternity in that nursery, searching for clues in the faded wallpaper and hidden compartments in the antique toy chest. I discovered fragments of a tale, a family torn apart by betrayal, a desperate search for forgiveness, and a curse that had doomed them to wander these halls. One piece of a torn letter read, "And when the light of truth finally shines, may our sins be washed away in its radiance." I could only wonder, was this curse related to the vague mentions of light that I'd encountered in other parts of the house? My mind was now a storm of dread and determination. I'd pieced together fragments of a nightmare. This house was more than a building. It was a repository of tortured souls. I felt an inexplicable pull to uncover every secret, to confront the darkness that had claimed these lives. I was in too deep now to walk away. I ascended from the nursery back into the main wing of the manor. The corridor seemed to warp and twist, guiding me towards a grand ballroom I hadn't yet explored. Where once merriment may have reigned, only emptiness and echoes of regret remained. At the centre of the room, a grand piano sat under a broken skylight. Every key was chipped. The instruments seemed poised to sing a mournful tune if only someone dared press them. I felt a presence here, more potent than anywhere else in the house. As I moved through the ballroom, the temperature dropped sharply. Shadows danced along the walls, coalescing into human forms for a fleeting second. I began to hear a chorus of voices, layered and overlapping, a cacophony of laughter, weeping, and whispered confessions. Suddenly, the ghostly assembly hushed. My flashlight wavered in my grasp as I felt a hand, cold and insistent, seemingly brush against my shoulder. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Instead, the voices coalesced into an unmistakable hymn, a song that told the tale of a fateful night. The melody was both beautiful and horrifically tragic, a lament for lives lost in a moment of unbearable despair. I closed my eyes and allowed the sound to seep into my bones. In that moment, visions overwhelmed me. I saw flashes of the past, a lavish dinner turned violent, the anguished faces of a family betrayed by one of their own, and, at the climax, a sudden burst of searing light that obliterated everything. The visions were jagged and raw, leaving me gasping for breath. I realized that the brilliant light was not salvation. It was the harbinger of their doom. When I opened my eyes, I spotted a door tucked away behind a heavy velvet curtain, partially concealed by hanging cobwebs. My pulse quickened. The journal had mentioned a secret chamber, keeper of the family's darkest truth, that could only be accessed when the light revealed it. With trembling hands, I pushed the curtain aside and reached for the brass doorknob. It was icy cold, and as I turned it, the room beyond beckoned with an otherworldly glow. Beyond the threshold lay a small antechamber that vibrated with the latent energy of sorrow and regret. In the center of the room stood a solitary pedestal, upon which rested an ornate locket. Its surface was etched with intricate designs and the initials M.A., perhaps for Margaret, the name on the portrait. A single beam of light, pure yet harsh, shone down from above, illuminating the locket as if revealing its secrets. As I approached, the air thickened. The whispering voices returned, now more insistent and mournful. Remember us. Forgive. Release. I knelt before the pedestal, my hands trembling as I reached out to take the locket. The moment my fingers closed around it, the room exploded with visions, a torrent of memories not my own. I saw the face of a proud woman, her eyes filled with both love and despair. I saw the tragic end of a family, a betrayal that had shattered lives and doomed them to endless wandering within these walls. I saw the cursed moment when the light, once a beacon of hope, turned into the instrument of their destruction. And finally, I saw a reflection of myself, or one of my ancestors, standing amidst the chaos, as if I were destined to bear witness to this endless cycle of pain. I knew then that I'd always been fated to come here. My decision to follow the directions of that letter was no decision at all, just the appearance of one. I was bound to this place in some way I couldn't yet understand. A deafening silence followed the onslaught. I sat there, the locket warm in my hand, unsure if I'd been granted some terrible insight or condemned to bear this burden myself. The whispers began one last time. Only through confronting the light can the darkness be banished. Only by accepting our shared sorrow can we find peace. My heart pounded with the realization that I was at the crossroads of fate. The voices of the dead, and perhaps even my own spirit, now merged into a single, solitary command: to seek out the true source of the light. I understood that somewhere beyond this room lay that luminous force, a secret chamber promised in the journal, where the family's tragedy was sealed away and possibly, just possibly, a chance for absolution remained. Slowly, I rose to my feet. Every step I took echoed not only in the silent chamber, but also in the depths of my soul. I clutched the locket tightly, feeling the weight of the past mixed with the uncertain promise of the future. The light beckoned through a long, narrow corridor attached to the back of the chamber, a corridor that I now understood would lead to the heart of the curse. I made my way towards the corridor, pausing only to glance back at the open doorway and the ballroom beyond it. The door slowly swung shut, closing with a final, resonant thud, as if sealing the fate of all that had come before. And then, with a deep breath and an almost trembling sense of purpose, I stepped forward into the corridor, where a pure, spectral light awaited. The light was blinding at first, then softened to an ethereal glow, revealing walls etched with faded murals, scenes of joy twisted by sorrow into macabre symbols. It was as if every brushstroke told a story of heartbreak and unfulfilled promises. I felt the pull, the same magnetic, irresistible urge that had drawn my ancestor to this house. The very air vibrated with the echoes of long-dead voices, each urging me onwards. Come, come, they whispered softly. See what lies beyond. There was no escape. The mystery of Wraith Hill demanded resolution. I realized then that, despite every terror I had faced, I couldn't turn back. The truth lay at the end of the corridor, wrapped in light, a truth I must confront, even if it would forever change who I am. I stood before the final door, the one that separated everything I'd learned from what lay beyond. With the old locket pressed tightly against my chest, I grasped the cold brass handle and slowly pushed it open. Beyond lay a chamber bathed in an almost unbearable spectral light, a flood of brilliance that seemed to pulse with the memories of every lost soul trapped within these walls. As I stepped into that room, the light wrapped around me like a tide, and suddenly, images began to form against it. At first they were disjointed, flashes of a bygone era, the laughter and tears of a long-dead family. Then, steadily, a single, horrifying truth emerged from the radiance. A face. My face. No, not mine, but eerily similar, almost identical. But his eyes were cold and calculating, and his smile was imbued with a secret malice. My blood ran cold when I realized who this was. This was my ancestor. In that luminous chamber, the betrayal unfolded before my eyes. I watched as he reached for a mystical seal, carving forbidden symbols into the very heart of Wraith Hill. In that desperate, treacherous moment, he had damned us all, dooming those that resided within Wraith Hill and unwittingly cursing our bloodline with a fate of endless sorrow and torment. The voices of the house, rising in a chorus of grief and regret, echoed around me. Only your blood can mend what he shattered. They whispered that the curse was not an accident, but the direct result of his actions, and now, by right of blood and destiny, I was summoned to repair it. Every step towards the centre of the room and the source of the light felt heavy with the weight of generations of betrayal. I realised that I was never meant to simply walk away from Wraith Hill. My presence had been ordained by the sins of my ancestor, a call to atone for the unholy act that had sealed our fate. The spectral glow softened around me, as if urging me to accept the burden of redemption. I knew that if I could reconcile the shadow of my ancestor by facing the darkness he unleashed, then perhaps I could bring peace to the anguished souls wandering these forsaken halls. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I stepped fully into the centre of the light. In that transformative moment, as the brilliance swallowed me whole, I vowed to break the cycle of despair. A promise not only to the restless spirits of Wraith Hill, but to my very own soul. Whether the curse would lift or transform into something altogether new remained unknown. All I understood was that the path to redemption began here, with an acceptance of a past steeped in betrayal. The light, both unforgiving and merciful, beckoned me forward with each step, and with each step I felt a fragile hope kindling in the spaces once filled by endless night.